A child signed into silence while the world pretended not to see. The ballroom was full, too full. Children ran everywhere, their laughter bouncing off marble floors and high ceilings. Parents clustered near the bar, champagne glasses in hand, smiling at each other like they hadn't just spent the last hour teaching their kids to avoid one corner of the room. That corner, where a small boy sat alone. He was 6, maybe 7. Dark hair, expensive suit, hands moving carefully in the air. Signing. "Play with me, please." No one answered. A little girl ran past him, stopped, stared. Her mother grabbed her wrist and yanked her back. "Stay away from him," the woman hissed. The girl's eyes went wide. "Why?" "Just stay away." The boy didn't hear the words, but he saw the look, the pulling away, the fear. His hands dropped to his lap. Across the room, Ryu Sung stood near the staff entrance, clipboard in hand, watching. He wasn't supposed to be watching. He was supposed to be checking auction items, coordinating with photographers, making sure everything ran smoothly. He was hired help, invisible. That's how it was supposed to work. But Shung had never been good at staying invisible. His chest tightened as he watched the boy sign again, slower this time, like he was running out of hope. Shung knew that feeling. "Hey, you good?" He turned. One of the other coordinators, a beta woman with a headset and a stressed expression, was staring at him. "Yeah," Shung said quietly. "I'm fine." She followed his gaze to the corner. Her expression shifted. "Oh, that's the An kid." Shung's stomach dropped. "An?" "Yeah, the twins' son." She lowered her voice. "You know, I'm the cursed one." Shung's jaw tightened. "He's not cursed." She shrugged. "That's what people say. The twins did some kind of ritual or something. Dark stuff. The kid's deafness was the price." She glanced around nervously. "Parents don't want their kids near him. Bad luck, you know?" Shung's hands curled into fists. "That's not how deafness works. I'm just telling you what I heard." She tapped her headset. "Anyway, the twins are back. They've been out on the terrace for the last 20 minutes. Business call or something." She walked off, muttering about seating arrangements. Shung looked back at the boy. Yuan. That was his name. An Yuan. He was signing again, his small hands forming the same desperate plea. "Play with me, please." A group of kids ran past him. One of them pointed, another laughed. Yuan's shoulders hunched inward. Shung's feet moved before his brain caught up. He crossed the ballroom in long strides, weaving between tables and clusters of parents who didn't even glance his way. He passed servers. He passed mothers clutching their children. He passed fathers who turned their backs. And then he was standing in front of Yuan. The boy looked up, startled. His eyes were dark, wide, rimmed with exhaustion that didn't belong on someone so young. Shung knelt down slowly, set the clipboard aside, then lifted his hands. "Hi," he signed. "What's your name?" Yuan's breath hitched. His hands trembled. "Yuan," he signed back. Shung smiled. "Hi, Yuan. I'm Shung." Yuan's eyes went bright. "You know sign?" "I do." "No one else does." Shung's chest ached. "I'm sorry." "It's okay." Yuan's hands move faster now. He's excited. "Do you want to play with me?" "Yeah," Shung signed. "I do." Behind them, the ballroom shifted. Conversations stuttered. Heads turned. Parents stared, horrified. One woman grabbed her husband's arm. "Is he talking to the envoy? He shouldn't be doing that. Someone should tell him. Let him find out on his own." Shung ignored them. He stayed focused on Yuan, whose smile was so genuine it hurt to look at. "Can you teach me a game?" Shung signed. Yuan nodded eagerly. He started to explain something about blocks and towers, his hands moving fast, his face glowing. And then a voice cut through the room, cold, sharp, dangerous. "Step away from our son." Shung froze. He turned slowly. Two men stood at the edge of the crowd, identical, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in perfectly tailored black suits. Their faces were unreadable, but their eyes were locked on Shung with an intensity that made his pulse stutter. The An twins, An Jaimin and An Junho. Jaimin's expression was ice, his jaw tight, his gaze cutting. Yunho's was quieter, but no less dangerous. He tilted his head slightly, watching Shung the way a predator watches prey. Now, Junho added softly. Yuan's hands grabbed Shung's sleeve. Don't go, he signed desperately. Please don't go. The ballroom held its breath. Shung stood slowly, heart hammering, but he didn't step back. Jamin's eyes narrowed. Who are you? Shung swallowed. I'm event staff. That's not what I asked. Junho stepped closer. How do you know sign language? Shung's throat tightened. I just do. Not good enough. Jamin's voice dropped lower. No one touches our son without permission. Yuan's hands tightened on Shung's sleeve. The twins' sense flooded the space. Sharp, dominant, overwhelming. Shung's knees almost buckled, but he forced himself to stay upright. I wasn't hurting him, Shung said quietly. He asked me to play. Jamin's expression didn't change. He doesn't ask strangers to play. He did. Junho's gaze flicked to Yuan, then back to Shung. Why you? Shung didn't have an answer. Yuan signed again, frantic now. He's nice. He's the only one who's nice. The twins went still. The ballroom was silent. And then Yamin spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What did he just say? The twins understood every word their son signed, and that wasn't the problem. The problem was the stranger kneeling beside him, making him smile in ways they hadn't seen in months. Jamin's voice sliced through the ballroom. Step away from our son. Shung stayed where he was, his heart pounding hard against his ribs. Yuan's small hands gripped his sleeve like a lifeline, fingers twisted into the fabric. Junho's tone came quieter but carried the same dangerous edge. We won't ask again. Shung rose slowly, carefully, but Yuan's grip only tightened. The boy's eyes were wide and desperate, his breathing uneven as he looked between his father's and the stranger who had finally noticed him. Shung gently loosened the boy's fingers from his sleeve, his chest already aching. It's okay, he signed, trying to keep his hand steady. Yuan shook his head violently, tears gathering in his eyes. Yamin stepped closer, his presence suffocating. Who are you? I already told you, Shung said quietly, forcing himself to meet the alpha's cold gaze. I'm event staff. That's not what I'm asking. Jamin's jaw tightened. Why are you talking to our son? Because he asked me to play with him. Junho tilted his head slightly, his eyes sharp and searching. And you just happen to know sign language? Shung swallowed hard, feeling the weight of both their stares. Yes. How convenient. Jamin's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What do you want from us? Shung blinked, thrown off balance. What? Money? A story to sell? Some kind of leverage? Jamin's voice dropped lower, dangerous. People don't approach our son without a reason. The accusation hit Shung hard. His hands curled into fists at his sides. I don't want anything from you. Everyone wants something, Jamin said flatly. Well, I don't. Shung's voice cracked despite his efforts to keep it steady. I just saw a kid sitting by himself and thought someone should care. Junho stepped closer, his scent flooding the space between them, sharp and overwhelming. So you decided to play hero? Shung's stomach twisted with frustration and grief. No, I decided to be a decent human being. The words landed like stones, sending ripples of shock through the watching crowd. Jamin's expression darkened, his entire body going rigid. You need to watch your tone. Why? Shung's voice rose despite the warning bells in his head. Because you don't like hearing the truth? Gasps erupted from the parents nearby, and their faces showing horror and fascination. Junho's scent sharpened, making several betas step back instinctively. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know your son sat alone in this ballroom for over an hour while you were outside on a business call, Shung shot back, his voice shaking with anger he could no longer contain. I know every single parent here has been teaching their children to stay away from him like he's contaminated. I know he's been begging someone, anyone, to notice him, and not one person would even look at him. Jamin's face flushed, a muscle ticking in his jaw. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me, Shung demanded, his chest heaving. Explain why your son was left alone in a room full of people who think he's cursed. Where were you when he needed you? The ballroom went completely silent. Junho's voice came out tight and controlled. We were handling business matters that required our immediate attention. And while you were handling business, your son was handling scorn and rejection and loneliness. Shung's voice cracked, his throat closing around the grief of his own memories. Do you even know what they're saying about him? About both of you? That is absolutely enough, Yemen said, his tone like ice. But Shung couldn't stop now. They're saying you did something dark and unnatural. They're saying his deafness is the price you paid, that he's cursed, that anyone who gets close to him will suffer. And instead of protecting him from those lies, Wan Yu left him alone where everyone could see him being abandoned by his own fathers. Yuan's hands dropped to his sides, his small body trembling, as tears streamed down his face. He stared up at Shung with such raw heartbreak that it physically hurt to witness. Jaemin's scent turned razor sharp. You have no right to speak to us this way. I have every right, Shung shouted, his voice breaking, because I was the only person in this entire ballroom who bothered to see him. The twins went absolutely still. The crowd held its breath, and then a new voice shattered the moment. That is enough. The event manager stormed across the floor, his face flushed red with fury. He grabbed Shung's arm roughly. You're finished here, get out. Shung's blood turned cold. What? You're fired, effective immediately. No, wait. Please. You just disrespected two of the most important people at this event. The manager's grip tightened painfully. You caused a scene. You embarrassed everyone. Get out now. Panic surged through Shung's chest. Please, I need this job. I can't afford to. You should have thought of that before you opened your mouth. The manager pointed toward the exit. Security will escort you out if necessary. Shung looked at the twins desperately. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Jaemin's expression was unreadable. Junho said nothing at all. The manager pulled Shung toward the exit, and then Shung heard it, a small choked sound that made his heart stop. He turned. Yuan was crying, silent tears streaming down his face as he stumbled forward with his hands reaching desperately. Don't go, Yuan signed frantically. Please don't go. The manager yanked Shung harder. Move! Yuan ran and crashed into Shung's legs, tiny hands clutching his pants, face buried against his thigh. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Shung dropped to his knees and pulled Yuan close. The boy clung to him, trembling. Shung's hands shook as he cupped Yuan's tear-stained face and brushed the wetness away with his thumbs. I'm sorry, Shung signed, his hands unsteady. I'm so sorry. Yuan shook his head violently as he signed. Stay! Please stay! Shung's chest ached so badly he could barely breathe. He ruffled Yuan's hair one last time, memorizing the warmth and the feel of the small body pressed against his. Then he stood and forced himself to turn away. Yuan crumpled to the floor, sobbing silently, reaching for Shung with trembling fingers that grasped only air. Shung walked toward the exit, every step heavier than the last. The manager shoved him through the glass doors. The rain hit him immediately, cold and heavy and relentless. Shung stood on the sidewalk, soaked within seconds. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out with numb fingers. A photo appeared on the screen. His brother, smiling, bright-eyed, alive. Shung's knees buckled. He pressed a hand over his mouth, choking back a sob. His brother had been deaf too. Someone had accused him of stealing at an event just like this one. The shame had broken him, and he'd taken his own life 3 days later. Shung had found him, in that state, and he was absolutely shattered. The rain poured harder, blurring his vision, and then he saw him across the street, Moy standing beneath a flickering streetlight. His brother. Shung's breath stopped. Hyung? The figure didn't move, but he didn't care. He had missed his brother too much. Shung stepped off the curb and ran into the street, rain pounding around him. He didn't see the headlights until the world exploded into blinding light. Yuan hadn't signed a single word in 5 days. Jaemin stood in the doorway of his son's bedroom, watching the small figure curled up on the window seat, staring out at nothing. The boy's hands rested limp in his lap, motionless in a way that made Jaemin's chest tighten with something close to fear. Junho appeared beside him, his expression carefully blank in the way it always was when he was trying not to break. He still won't eat? 3 bites of toast this morning, Jaemin said quietly. That's all. They tried everything, new toys scattered across the floor, untouched. Yuan's favorite book stacked on the nightstand, unread. They'd signed to him for hours asking questions, telling stories, begging for any kind of response. But Yuan only stared through them like they weren't even there. Junho's jaw tightened. Annie, we can't keep going like this. I know. The twins exchanged a look that carried the weight of 5 sleepless nights, and a fear neither of them knew how to name. They'd faced hostile board meetings, corporate sabotage, entire markets turning against them. But nothing had ever terrified them the way their son's silence did. Jamin stepped into the room and knelt beside the window seat, bringing himself to Yuan's eye level. He reached out slowly and touched the boy's shoulder. Yuan flinched and pulled away. Jamin's hand dropped back to his side, his throat closing around words he couldn't say. Junho crouched down on Yuan's other side. We're going to see someone today, he signed carefully, making sure his movements were clear and gentle. Someone who helps kids when they're feeling sad. Yuan didn't look at him, and the therapist's office smelled like lavender and had walls painted soft blue. Dr. Sandra Kim sat across from the twins in a chair designed to look less intimidating than it was, her expression calm and patient as she listened to them explain what had happened at the gala. Jamin's voice was tight and controlled as he spoke. There was a man, event staff. He knew sign language and started talking to Yuan without our permission. And your son responded to him? Dr. Kim asked gently. Junho nodded, his fingers laced together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. More than he's responded to anyone in months. He was smiling, laughing. We hadn't seen him like that since before he lost his hearing. What happened next? Jamin's jaw clenched. The man overstepped. He made accusations, caused a scene. The event manager fired him on the spot. Dr. Kim's pen moved across her notepad. And how did Yuan react? The silence stretched too long. Junho's voice came out rough. He broke down, cried harder than I've ever seen him cry. He tried to hold on to the man, wouldn't let go. We had to pull him away. Dr. Kim looked up from her notes, her gaze sharp and assessing. And since that night, nothing, Yamin said flatly. He won't sign, won't engage, barely eats. It's like he's shut down completely. Dr. Kim set her pen down and leaned forward slightly. What you're describing sounds like attachment trauma. Your son formed a connection with someone who made him feel seen and understood, and then that person was abruptly removed from his life. To a child, especially one who already struggles with feeling isolated, and that kind of loss can be devastating. Jamin's chest tightened. So what do we do? You find him, Dr. Kim said simply, the man from the gala. You bring him back into Yuan's life in a controlled, supervised way, and you help your son process what happened. Junho's expression hardened. Absolutely not. We don't know anything about this man. He could be dangerous, unstable. He could also be exactly what your son needs right now, Dr. Kim interrupted gently. I understand your concerns, but the reality is that Yuan has experienced a profound loss, and the only way to help him heal is to address it directly. The twins sat in tense silence for a long moment. Finally, Yamin stood. We'll think about it. They didn't think about it for long. 2 days later, after Yuan refused to get out of bed for an entire morning, Jamin made a phone call. Within 3 hours, they had a name, an address, and a location. Ryu Sung, 26 years old, currently a patient at Seoul Grace Medical Center. The hospital administrator met them in a private conference room, her smile professional but strained. Mr. An, thank you for coming. I understand you're here about one of our patients? Ryu Sung, Jamin said coldly. We need to see his medical records. The administrator's smile faltered. I'm afraid that's not possible. Patient confidentiality. Junho leaned forward, his voice quiet and dangerous. Our family foundation donated $40 million to this hospital last year. I suggest you reconsider what's possible. The color drained from the administrator's face. She glanced between them, clearly weighing her options. Would then reached for her phone with shaking hands. I'll have Dr. Chen come speak with you. Dr. Chen arrived 10 minutes later, a thin man with tired eyes and a white coat that looked like it hadn't been changed in days. He sat down across from the twins and folded his hands on the table. Mr. Shung was admitted 6 days ago, Dr. Chen said carefully, clearly uncomfortable with the entire conversation. He was struck by a vehicle while crossing the street during a rainstorm. Jamin's expression didn't change. His injuries, 3 broken ribs, fractured left arm, severe concussion. He's recovering, but it's been slow. What else? Junho pressed, his eyes narrowing slightly. Dr. Chen hesitated, and that hesitation told them everything they needed to know. There have been some complications, the doctor admitted reluctantly. None beyond the physical injuries. Jaemin leaned forward slightly. What kind of complications? Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. Sheng has reported seeing someone who isn't there. His deceased brother, according to his intake forms. He claims he saw him standing across the street before the accident, which is why he ran into traffic. Jaemin and Junho exchanged a look. Hallucinations, Jaemin said flatly. We're not certain yet, Dr. Chen said quickly. It could be trauma-related, grief-induced, or a symptom of the head injury. We have a psychiatric evaluation scheduled, but he might be mentally unstable, Junho finished coldly. Dr. Chen didn't deny it. Jaemin stood abruptly, his decision made. Thank you for your time, doctor. We'll be leaving now. Junho rose as well, already turning toward the door. They made it 3 steps before they heard it. Laughter, bright and genuine, and so startlingly out of place in a hospital hallway that both twins froze mid-step. They turned slowly. Through the window of a nearby patient room, they could see their son running in delighted circles around a hospital bed, his small hands moving rapidly in the air, his face lit up with a joy they hadn't seen in what felt like forever. And sitting up in the bed, one arm in a cast and bruises darkening his face, was Ryu Xiong, laughing despite what had to be significant pain as he signed back to Yuan with his good hand. The twins stood frozen in the hallway, watching their son be happy for the first time in days, and neither of them could bring themselves to walk away. Xiong was signing discharge papers when the twins walked in. His hand froze mid-signature, the pen hovering over the line where his name should go. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge them, just focused on the paper in front of him like it was the most important document he'd ever seen. The nurse glanced between them nervously. I'll give you some privacy, she said quickly, slipping out of the room and closing the door behind her. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Xiong finished signing his name and set the pen down carefully, his movements deliberate and controlled. His left arm was still in a cast, his ribs still ached with every breath, and the bruises on his face had faded to an ugly yellow-green that made him look worse than he felt. We need to talk, Jaemin said finally, his voice quieter than Xiong had ever heard it. Xiong still didn't look at them. I'm being discharged. There's nothing to talk about. There's everything to talk about, Junho said, stepping closer. We owe you an apology. That made Xiong look up. His eyes were tired, shadowed with sleepless nights and pain medication. But there was something sharp in his gaze that hadn't been there before. An apology. Yes. Jaemin's jaw tightened like the word physically hurt to say. We accused you of having ulterior motives. We treated you like a threat when you were only trying to help our son. We were wrong. Xiong let out a bitter laugh that turned into a wince as his ribs protested. You think an apology fixes what happened? I lost my job because of you. I got hit by a car because I had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. Junho's expression tightened with something that might have been guilt. We know, and we can't undo what happened, but we can offer you something now. I don't want anything from you. Our son does, Jaemin said bluntly. Yuan hasn't signed a single word since the gala. He won't eat, won't sleep properly, won't engage with anyone. He's shutting down completely. Xiong's chest tightened despite himself. That's not my problem. We're making it your problem, Junho said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket and setting it on the hospital bed. We want to hire you, full-time position as Yuan's caretaker and sign language companion. Live-in arrangement at our estate, salary and benefits included. Xiong stared at the envelope like it might explode. Ma, you're insane. We're desperate, Jaemin corrected. Our son needs you. The therapist confirmed it. You're the only person who's been able to reach him in months. So you're buying me, Xiong said flatly, just like you buy everything else. Junho's eyes flashed with something dangerous. We're offering you a job. You're free to refuse. Xiong wanted to refuse. He wanted to tell them exactly where they could shove their job offer and their money and their guilt. But his hands were shaking slightly as he reached for the envelope. And when he opened it and saw the salary listed on the contract inside, his breath caught. It was more money than he'd made in 2 years at his last 3 jobs combined. His medical bills were piling up. He had no apartment to go back to since he'd been evicted 3 days before the gala. He had no references, no prospects, and a psychiatric evaluation scheduled for next week that would probably destroy any chance he had of working with children again. He hated them. He hated their arrogance, their wealth, their assumption that money could fix everything. But he needed this. Shung's throat felt tight as he looked up at them. When do I start? The An estate was obscene in its wealth. Shung stood in the marble entryway with his single duffel bag clutched in his good hand, staring up at chandeliers that probably cost more than his childhood home. A housekeeper showed him to his room on the second floor, a space larger than any apartment he'd ever lived in, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Mr. Yuan's room is just down the hall, the housekeeper said kindly. He's been waiting for you. Shung barely had time to set his bag down before he heard the soft patter of small feet in the hallway. The door burst open and Yuan flew into the room, his face bright with a joy so pure it made Shung's chest ache. The boy crashed into him, wrapping small arms around Shung's waist and burying his face against his stomach. Shung's breath stuttered. He carefully rested his good hand on Yuan's head, feeling the soft curls beneath his palm. I missed you, Yuan signed when he finally pulled back, his hands moving fast and eager. I thought you left forever. I'm here now, Shung signed back, forcing a smile that felt fragile on his face. Yuan's happiness was infectious, filling the days with laughter and games and sign language lessons that felt more like play than work. But beneath Shung's carefully maintained calm, something was fracturing. It started small, a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision that disappeared when he turned his head. The sense of someone standing just behind him when he knew he was alone. Then it got worse. 5 days into his new job, Shung was helping Yuan with a puzzle in the sunroom when he saw his brother standing by the window. Not a shadow or a trick of the light, but solid and real, wearing the same clothes he'd been wearing the day he died. Shung's hands went numb. The puzzle piece he was holding clattered to the floor. Young, he whispered. His brother smiled sadly and lifted his hand in a small wave. Yuan tugged on Shung's sleeve. His face scrunched with confusion. Are you okay? He signed. Shung blinked and his brother was gone. Just sunlight streaming through empty windows. I'm fine, Shung signed back, but his hands were shaking badly enough that Yuan noticed. The episodes got worse, more frequent, more vivid, lasting longer each time. A week later, Shung was watching Yuan play near the estate's pool when the world shifted sideways. His brother appeared again, this time standing on the other side of the water, beckoning him closer. Shung's feet moved without his permission. He took a step forward, then another, his vision tunneling until all he could see was his brother's face. Behind him, Yuan called out something, but the sound felt distant and muffled. Shung reached the edge of the pool. His brother smiled and reached out his hand. Come home, was Shung. I'm so lonely without you. Shung's foot lifted, about to step into the water, and then strong hands grabbed his shoulders and yanked him backward. He crashed into a solid chest, the impact jolting him back to reality. Jamin's face swam into focus above him, pale and furious. What the hell were you doing? Shung's breath came in gasps. He looked around wildly and saw Yuan standing at the edge of the pool, his small body trembling, tears streaming down his face. The boy had been trying to grab Shung's hand. If he leaned any further, he would have fallen in. Junho had Yuan pulled tight against his chest now, his face buried in the boy's hair. What happened? Jamin demanded, his grip on Shung's shoulders almost painful. You just froze. You were about to walk into the pool. Shung's vision blurred. I saw him. And I saw my brother. The twins exchanged a look. That night, they sat him down in their private study and demanded the truth. Shung told them everything. His brother's death, the accusations, the guilt that never left, the hallucinations that were getting worse. When he finished, his voice was raw and his hands were shaking in his lap. Junho's expression was unreadable. You're a danger to yourself, and possibly to our son, Jamin added coldly. Shung nodded, unable to argue. I'll leave. I shouldn't have come here. They both turned to see Yuan standing in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted against the hallway light. He must have snuck out of bed. The boy walked straight to Sheng and climbed into his lap, wrapping his arms around Sheng's neck and holding on tight. He's sad, Yuan signed against Sheng's shoulder. He needs me. The twins watched their son cling to the broken man who was supposed to protect him, and something in both their chests cracked wide open. Seong knew what was coming before the twins even opened their mouths. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands folded in his lap, staring at the floor while Jaemin and Yunho stood in his doorway, like executioners delivering a sentence. The morning light filtered through the windows, soft and golden, completely at odds with the heaviness pressing down on all three of them. We can't let you continue as Yuan's caretaker, Jaemin said finally, his voice carefully controlled, in that way that meant he'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. Not after what happened at the pool? Sheng nodded slowly, his throat too tight to speak. Junho stepped further into the room, his expression softer but no less resolute. We're hiring a professional, someone trained to handle situations like this. It's not personal, Sheng. Oh, it's about keeping our son safe. I understand, Sheng managed to say, his voice coming out rough and small. But you're not leaving, Jaemin added quickly, almost urgently. You'll stay here in the mansion until you're better. We'll make sure you get the help you need. Sheng's hands curled into fists against his thighs. You don't have to do that. I can find somewhere else to go. Where? Junho asked bluntly. You have no apartment, no job, and medical bills you can't afford. Where exactly would you go? The truth of it hit like a slap. Sheng had nowhere. He was completely, utterly alone. We're not throwing you out, Jaemin said, his tone gentler now. We just need you to focus on getting better. Let us help you do that. Sheng wanted to argue, wanted to tell them he didn't need their charity or their pity. But the words died in his throat because the alternative was ending up on the street with a head full of ghosts and nowhere to run from them. Okay, he whispered. The twins left him alone after that, and Sheng spent the rest of the day hidden in his room, shame burning through his chest like acid. He'd failed. Failed Yuan. Failed himself. Failed at the one thing he thought he could still do right. The psychiatric evaluation was scheduled for the following morning. The twins had arranged everything, made all the calls, set up transportation to the clinic. All Sheng had to do was show up. But when morning came, he couldn't move. He woke up to his brother sitting at the foot of his bed, looking exactly the way he had the last time Sheng saw him alive. Young, bright-eyed, when wearing that soft smile that had always made everything feel manageable. You're not really going to let them take me away, are you? His brother signed, his movements slow and deliberate. Sheng's breath caught in his chest. You're not real. I'm all you have left, his brother signed back. If you go to that appointment, they'll make me disappear. They'll fill you with medications and therapy and tell you I'm just a symptom. But I'm not, Sheng-ah. I'm your brother. I'm the only family you have. Sheng pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to block out the vision. But when he opened them again, his brother was still there, looking at him with so much love and sadness that it physically hurt. Don't leave me alone again, his brother signed. Please. When Yamin knocked on the door an hour later to tell him the car was ready, Sheng didn't answer. He'd locked the door from the inside and pushed a chair against it for good measure. Sheng? Jamin's voice came through the wood, tight with concern. We need to leave in 10 minutes. I'm not going, Sheng said, his voice shaking. Silence. Then Yunho's voice joined Yamin's. What do you mean you're not going? I can't. Sheng's hands were trembling badly now. I can't lose him. He's all I have left. Sheng, open the door, Jaemin said, his tone shifting into something closer to command. No. Sheng backed away from the door, his brother's ghost standing beside him now, a hand resting gently on his shoulder. You don't understand. If I go there, they'll take away my memories of him. They'll make me forget. I can't forget him. I won't. He heard the twins talking in low, urgent voices outside, then footsteps retreating down the hallway. Sheng sank to the floor, his back against the bed, and let his brother's ghost sit beside him in the kind of comfortable silence they used to share when they were kids. 20 minutes later, he heard Yemen's voice again, but this time it was calmer, quieter. Sheng, we talked to Dr. Kim. She said we don't have to force you to go today. We can reschedule when you're ready. Sung's eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. But she also said something else, Junho added, his voice carrying through the door with unexpected gentleness. She said your hallucinations aren't just about grief. They're about loneliness. I'm about trying to fill a space that was left empty when you lost your brother. Shung pressed his forehead against his knees. She said what you need isn't just medication or therapy, Jamin continued. You need connection, family, love, things that remind you that you're not alone anymore. The words settled into Shung's chest, heavy and uncomfortable. Hours passed. The episode finally faded, leaving Shung exhausted and hollowed out on the floor of his room. When he finally unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway, both twins were waiting for him. I should leave, Shung said before either of them could speak. I'm causing too much trouble. You've done enough for me already. No, Jamin said immediately. You're not going anywhere, Junho added, his tone leaving no room for argument. Shung blinked at them, confused. But we're going to help you, Jamin said firmly. Actually help you, not just throw money at the problem and hope it goes away. We're going to be here, Junho said, every step of the way. Something in Shung's chest cracked, just a little. Over the following days, the twins showed up in ways Shung never expected. Jamin brought him breakfast every morning and sat with him while he ate, not talking, just being present. Junho came to his room at night when Shung couldn't sleep and read to him from books in soft, steady tones until his breathing evened out. And Yuan, despite being told to keep his distance, refused to stay away. The boy snuck into Shung's room with drawings he'd made, stories he wanted to share, hugs he gave freely and without fear. Slowly, carefully, Shung started to let them in. One night, Shung woke up gasping from a nightmare. His brother's face still burned into his vision, the memory of finding him lifeless and cold flooding through him with brutal clarity. Before he could even catch his breath, his door opened. Both twins were there, already moving toward him like they'd been waiting for this. Jamin sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Shung against his chest without asking permission. Junho climbed onto the other side and ran his fingers gently through Shung's hair, his touch careful and soothing. You're safe, Jamin murmured against the top of Shung's head. We're right here. Shung's body shook with sobs he'd been holding back for weeks. He buried his face in Yamin's shoulder and let himself break. Let himself be held. Let himself feel something other than alone. Junho's hand moved in slow, rhythmic strokes through his hair. Jamin's arms stayed solid and steady around him, their scents wrapped around Shung like a blanket, warm and grounding and safe in a way he hadn't felt since before his brother died. And that's when it hit him, the way his body relaxed into Jamin's hold, the way his breathing synced with Junho's, the way their scents didn't overwhelm him anymore, but comforted him instead. He was bonding with them. Panic slammed into Seong's chest like a freight train. He jerked back suddenly, scrambling away from both of them until his back hit the headboard. I can't do this, he gasped, his eyes wide and wild. Both twins froze, confusion written across their faces. Sung, what? Jamin started. I can't, Sung repeated, his voice breaking completely. Because falling for them, letting them in, right, trusting them with the broken pieces of himself terrified him more than any ghost ever could. The next day, Shung needed to breathe air that didn't smell like the twins. He stood at the front door of the estate, his hand resting on the handle, trying to work up the courage to ask for something as simple as a walk. Behind him, he could feel Jamin's gaze burning into his back. Where are you going? Jamin's voice was carefully neutral, but Shung could hear the tension underneath. Just for a walk, Shung said quietly, not turning around. I need some space to think. Silence stretched between them. Then Junho appeared from the hallway, his expression unreadable as he looked between Shung and his brother. How long? Junho asked. An hour, maybe less. Shung finally turned to face them both. Why, I just need to clear my head. The twins exchanged one of those wordless conversations that happened entirely through glances and subtle shifts in posture. Finally, Jamin nodded stiffly. Stay in the neighborhood. Don't go far. Shung wanted to argue that he wasn't a prisoner, but the truth was he felt like one. Not because of locked doors or guards, but because of the feelings growing in his chest that he couldn't afford to have. He stepped outside before either of them could change their minds. The neighborhood surrounding the An estate was the kind of place where wealth whispered instead of shouted. Manicured lawns, tasteful architecture, expensive cars parked in driveways like casual afterthoughts. Shung walked with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, trying to sort through the mess inside his head. In the way Yamin's arms had felt around him, the gentleness in Yunho's touch, the safety he'd felt wrapped in their scents. He was bonding with them, actually bonding, and that terrified him more than any hallucination ever could. "Excuse me?" Shung stopped walking and turned to find a woman standing on the sidewalk behind him. She was in her 50s, dressed in expensive casual wear, her smile polite, but her eyes calculating. "Yes?" Shung said carefully. "I thought that was you." She stepped closer, her smile widening in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "You're the young man staying with the An family, aren't you? I saw you at the charity gala a few weeks ago." Shung's stomach tightened. "I'm just taking a walk." Of course, of course." She waved a dismissive hand. "I'm just surprised to see you here. Why, it's not often the Ans take in house guests, especially not after what happened at the event." "I work for them," Shung said flatly, already regretting this conversation. "Oh?" The woman's eyebrows rose. "In what capacity?" Before Shung could answer, another voice joined them. A man in his 40s had stopped his morning jog and was looking at Shung with open curiosity. "Is this the one?" the man asked the woman. "I believe so," she said, her tone dripping with false concern. "The one who made that scene at the gala." Shung's jaw tightened. "I should get going." "Wait, wait." The woman touched his arm lightly, stopping him. "I'm just concerned for your well-being, dear. It's very unusual for the Ons to bring a stranger into their home like this, especially given the rumors." "What rumors?" Shung heard himself ask, and even though every instinct told him to walk away, the man and woman exchanged meaningful looks. Another neighbor had stopped now, too, an older woman walking a small dog, her interest clearly piqued. "Well," the first woman lowered her voice conspiratorially, "you know about their son, don't you? About how he lost his hearing?" Shung's hands curled into fists in his pockets. "It's a medical condition, that's all." "That's what they say," the man interjected, his tone suggesting he knew better. "But there are stories about what the twins did to gain their fortune. Dark things, unnatural things. Rituals," the older woman with the dog added, her voice trembling with horrified fascination. "They made a deal with something they shouldn't have, and the boy's deafness was the price." Shung's throat felt tight. "That's insane. Hana, you're talking about curses and rituals like this is some kind of horror movie." "Is it?" the first woman asked, her expression sympathetic in a way that felt more like pity. "Then why would they take you in? A stranger who defended their cursed son in public? Don't you think that's strange?" "They needed help with their son," Shung said, but his voice came out weaker than he intended. "They have money for 100 professional caretakers," the man said. "Why you specifically? What makes you special?" The question hit harder than it should have. Shung didn't have an answer. "You should be careful," the woman said softly, her hand still resting on his arm. "The Ons don't help people out of kindness, not people like you. If they've brought you into their home, wait, it's because you're useful to them somehow. Or because you're the next offering," the older woman whispered. Shung jerked his arm away from the first woman's touch. "You're all crazy. They're just parents trying to take care of their son." "Are they?" the man challenged. "Or are they using that boy the same way they're using you?" More people had gathered now, drawn by the commotion, their faces blurred together, voices overlapping with theories and warnings, and thinly veiled accusations. Shung's chest tightened. His breathing came faster, shallower. Why had they hired him so quickly? Why had they been so insistent he stay? Shung's brother appeared at the edge of the crowd, standing perfectly still while everyone else moved and talked around him. His expression was sad and knowing. "I told you," his brother signed slowly. "Shauna, everyone leaves. Everyone lies." Shung's vision started to tunnel. The voices got louder. The crowd pressed closer, and he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't. A car door slammed. The crowd went silent immediately. Sung looked up to see Jamin and Yunho cutting through the gathered neighbors like twin blades. Their expressions were cold fury, barely contained, their presence so commanding that people actually stepped back without being told to. This conversation is over, Jamin said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't allow for argument. Junho moved directly to Seong, his hand gentle but firm on Seong's elbow. Come on, we're leaving. They guided him to the car, and no one dared to say another word. The neighbors scattered like leaves in a storm, here disappearing into their expensive homes and leaving the sidewalk empty. Seong let himself be placed in the back seat. Jamin slid in beside him while Junho took the driver's seat. Neither of them spoke as Junho started the engine. The silence lasted until they were halfway back to the estate. Then Seong's voice came out small and broken. Why did you really take me in? I don't work for you anymore. Jamin's head turned sharply toward him. What? Those people, Seong said, staring at his hands. They said you don't help people without a reason, that I must be useful to you somehow. So why? Why me? Jamin's expression shifted into something that looked almost like hurt. Because our son needs you. And maybe we do too, Junho added quietly from the front seat. Seong didn't respond, couldn't respond. And the doubt had already rooted itself too deep, and the twins' words couldn't reach past it. When they arrived back at the estate, Seong went straight to his room and closed the door behind him. He heard the twins in the hallway, heard their quiet conversation, but couldn't make out the words. Then footsteps approached, small, quick ones. It was Yuan. The knocking started anyway, soft, persistent thumps of small hands against the wood. Seong pressed his forehead against the door, his chest aching with every beat of those tiny fists. The knocking continued, desperate little rhythms that spoke louder than any words could. Before Seong could move, his brother appeared beside him in the room. More solid than ever before, his presence overwhelming in the small space. They'll destroy you, his brother signed, his movements sharp and urgent. Just like everyone destroyed me. They're using your pain, using your loneliness. Don't let them take you from me too. You're all I have left. Don't abandon me for them. Yuan's knocking grew more insistent, faster, harder. The sound of a child who didn't understand why the person he loved wouldn't open the door. Seong slid down to the floor, his back pressed against the barrier between them. On one side, his brother's ghost demanding he run, grabbing at his shoulders with hands that felt too real. On the other, a living child's desperate plea beating against the wood. And in the hallway beyond, two alphas stood helplessly, watching their son beg for someone who was drowning in ghosts and fear. It took days and Seong was falling in love, and it was the most terrifying thing he'd ever felt. He sat on the edge of his bed, watching sunlight stream through the window, and tried to convince himself it was a bad idea. The twins were complicated, powerful, still strangers in so many ways. And he was broken, haunted, barely holding himself together on good days. But his heart didn't care about logic. Every time Jamin brought him tea in the morning, their fingers brushing as Seong took the cup, his chest tightened with something warm and impossible. Every time Junho read to him at night, his voice low and soothing in the darkness, Seong wanted to reach out and never let go. He was falling, and he didn't know how to stop. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. Not the desperate pounding from days before, but something gentler and more hopeful. Seong stood and opened the door. Yuan stood in the hallway, holding a piece of paper covered in crayon drawings. His face lit up when he saw Seong, and he immediately thrust the drawing forward. Seong took it carefully, studying the colorful mess of lines and shapes. 3 tall figures and 1 small one, all holding hands. A house, a sun with a smiling face. I drew us, Yuan signed, his movements quick and excited. You, me, and my dads. We're a family now. Something in Seong's chest cracked wide open. Yuan tilted his head, studying Seong's face with the kind of perceptiveness only children seem to have. You make my dad smile again, he signed slowly, seriously. They were sad before you came. Now they're happy. Seong's throat closed completely. He knelt down and pulled Yuan into a hug. My feeling the boy's small arms wrap around his neck without hesitation. When he finally pulled back, Seong's hands were shaking as he signed. Thank you. For this. For everything. Yuan smiled and ran off down the hallway, leaving Seong standing in his doorway with a crayon drawing clutched in his hands and tears burning in his eyes. He looked up to find Yamin and Yunho standing at the end of the hall, watching him with identical expressions that made his heart race. Shung took a breath and walked toward them. "I want to get help," he said quietly. "Real help. I'm ready." The relief that washed over both their faces was so profound, it almost broke him. "Okay," Jemin said, his voice rough with emotion. "Okay, we'll take you right now." The hospital evaluation was thorough and exhausting. Ik Sung sat in a small office answering questions about his brother, his hallucinations, his history of trauma and grief. The twins stayed with him the entire time, flanking him like guards, their presence a constant anchor. When the doctor explained the treatment plan, a combination of therapy and medication designed to help manage grief-induced psychosis, Jamin reached over and took Shung's hand without asking permission. Shung didn't pull away. Over the next few days, the twins threw themselves into caring for him with an intensity that left Shung breathless. Jamin set alarms to remind Shung about his medication, bringing him pills with water and a gentle touch to his shoulder. Junho sat with him during the hardest moments, when the medication made him nauseous or the therapy sessions left him raw and exposed. They were there, and always there. On the fourth night, Shung was sitting in the library, staring at a book he wasn't really reading, when both twins walked in and sat down on either side of him. "We need to tell you something," Jamin said, his voice quieter than Shung had ever heard it. Shung set the book aside, his heart already racing. "What?" Junho leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "We're falling for you, both of us. We have been for a while now." Shung's breath stopped. Jamin continued, his gaze steady and unflinching. "We know this isn't the right time. We know you're dealing with so much already, but we needed you to know. We want to build something real with you. When you're ready." Shung's hands trembled in his lap. "I feel the same way," he whispered, "about both of you. But I'm too broken for this. I can't give you what you deserve when I can barely hold myself together." "Then we'll wait," Junho said simply, "however long it takes." "We're not going anywhere," Jamin added. "We'll help you heal first. Everything else can come after." Shung looked between them, these two impossibly beautiful men who looked at him like he was worth waiting for, and something inside him shifted. Maybe he could have this. Maybe he could be whole enough to love them the way they deserved. Over the following days, the episodes became less frequent. The medication was working, dulling the sharp edges of his grief enough that his brother's ghost appeared less often, less vividly. Shung started to believe that recovery might actually be possible. He caught himself watching the twins more often now. The way Jamin's jaw tightened when he was concentrating on something. The way Yunho's eyes softened when he looked at Yuan. The way they both looked at Shung when they thought he wasn't paying attention. His heart raced every time they were near. His scent shifted slightly in their presence, warmer and more open than it had been in years. He was getting better. He was healing. And maybe, just maybe, he could let himself have this. That night, Shung was so lost in thoughts of hope and possibility that he didn't notice the pill organizer sitting untouched on his nightstand. He brushed his teeth, changed into sleep clothes, and climbed into bed without taking his evening medication. He fell asleep thinking about Yemin's smile and Yunho's hands and Yuan's drawing of their family. He woke up to his brother standing at the foot of his bed. But this time was different. This time his brother looked angry. "You forgot me," his brother signed, his movements sharp and accusing. "You're replacing me with them." Shung sat up slowly, his mind foggy with sleep and confusion. "Hyung, you promised you'd never forget me," his brother continued, moving closer. "But you're letting them erase me. You're choosing them over your own blood." "That's not true," Shung said, but his voice came out weak and uncertain. His brother walked to the window and opened it, cool night air rushing into the room. "If you really love me, you'd come home. You'd stop abandoning me for people who will only hurt you." Shung stood up, his legs moving without his permission. The medication's absence left him vulnerable, and his mind unable to distinguish between reality and hallucination. "Come home, Shung-ah," his brother signed from the open window. "I'm so lonely without you." Shung walked toward the window, his bare feet silent on the floor. He looked down at the 4-story drop to the ground below, and it didn't register as dangerous. Nothing registered except his brother's sad eyes and the overwhelming guilt crushing his chest. "I'm sorry I forgot you," Shung whispered. His brother smiled and reached out his hand. Then come with me. Come home. Shung climbed onto the window ledge, the cool night air washing over him, one foot extended out into the empty darkness. Behind him, his bedroom door burst open. Shung! Two voices screamed his name in perfect, terrified harmony. Shung's foot slipped before the twins could reach him. For one suspended heartbeat, he hung in the air between the window ledge and nothing, his brother's ghost smiling just beyond his reach. Then gravity took hold and pulled him down. 4 stories. The twins' screams tore through the night, raw and animalistic and utterly broken. Shung hit the ground and the world exploded into pain and darkness. Above him, Yuan stood frozen at the bedroom window, his small hands pressed against the wall, tears streaming silently down his face as he signed the same words over and over into the empty air. Please don't die. Please don't die. Please don't die. Jamin reached Shung first, his bare feet pounding down the stairs and across the garden with inhuman speed. He dropped to his knees beside Shung's crumpled body, his hands hovering uselessly as blood pooled beneath Shung's head. No, 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 Jamin chanted, his voice breaking on every syllable. He carefully cradled Shung's head in his lap, feeling the warm wetness soaking through his pajama pants. Junho was already on the phone with emergency services, his voice shaking so badly he could barely get the address out. He fell from a 4th-floor window. He's not moving. There's so much blood. Please hurry. Shung's chest rose and fell in shallow, rattling breaths that sounded wrong, like something inside him had shattered. Stay with us, Jamin whispered, his tears falling onto Seong's pale face. Please stay with us. We can't lose you. We can't. Junho collapsed beside them, his hand finding Shung's wrist to check for a pulse. It was there, weak and thready, but there. He's still alive, and he's still fighting. The ambulance arrived in minutes that felt like hours. Paramedics swarmed around them, asking questions neither twin could properly answer. Shung was loaded onto a stretcher, neck braced, body immobilized. We're riding with him, Jamin said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The paramedics didn't argue. In the ambulance, Yemin held Shung's hand while Yunho pressed himself against the opposite wall, his alpha scent flooding the small space with desperate protective fury. Don't leave us, Junho whispered. We need you. Yuan needs you. Please don't leave us. Shung's eyes remained closed, his breathing assisted by an oxygen mask, monitors beeping frantically around them. At the hospital, Shung was rushed into emergency surgery. Multiple fractures in his left leg and arm, 3 broken ribs, sorry internal bleeding, severe head trauma. The twins were forced to wait outside, pacing the hallway like caged animals. Junho broke first. He slammed his fist into the wall hard enough to crack the plaster, then slid down to the floor with his head in his hands, his entire body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back since the moment Shung fell. Jamin dropped down beside him and pulled his brother into his arms, and they held each other while they fell apart. 6 hours later, a surgeon emerged with exhausted eyes. He made it through surgery, but he's in a coma. We can't predict when or if he'll wake up. The twins stood beside Shung's hospital bed, staring at the broken body wrapped in bandages, and connected to machines that breathed for him and monitored his fading heartbeat. I'll take the first shift, Jamin said hoarsely. So you go get Yuan and bring him here. Junho nodded numbly and left. Jamin pulled a chair close to the bed and took Shung's hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines and bruises covering his skin. Please come back to us, Jamin whispered into the sterile silence. Please fight. We love you. We need you. Please. Inside the darkness of his coma, Shung floated in nothing. He heard voices calling his name, but they were distant and muffled, like they were coming from underwater. He tried to swim toward them but couldn't find which direction to go. Then his brother appeared, solid and real in the darkness. You failed again, his brother said, his voice cold in a way it had never been in life. You can't even die, right? Shung blinked in confusion. Young, no one will ever love you, his brother continued, stepping closer. Juan, you're too broken, too damaged. The twins will realize it eventually. They'll leave you just like everyone else did. That's not true, Shung said weakly. His brother grabbed his wrist, his grip painfully tight. It's better here, in the dark, where you can't hurt anyone, where no one can hurt you. He started pulling Shung deeper into the darkness, toward an abyss that felt like death itself. Shung resisted, trying to pull away, but his brother's grip was iron. Let me go. Why? So you can disappoint more people? So you can break more hearts? His brother's voice grew harsher, crueler. You're better off here. Give up. Let go. Then faintly, Shung heard another voice breaking through the darkness. Jamin's voice, raw with grief. Please come back to us. Junho's voice, barely a whisper. We love you. And we need you. And beneath it all, the soft sound of small hands tapping against something hard. You won. Something inside Shung ignited. No! He screamed, yanking his arm back with all his strength. I have a family waiting for me. People who love me. A life worth fighting for. He shoved his brother toward the abyss instead. And in that moment, his brother's face began to change. The features morphed and shifted until Shung was staring at his own face, twisted with self-hatred and grief, and all the poison he'd been feeding himself for years. The realization hit him like lightning. His brother had never been haunting him. He'd been haunting himself. Every cruel word, every accusation, every reason to give up had come from his own voice wearing his brother's face. His guilt had created a ghost to punish himself with, an alter ego made from his own self-loathing. You're not real, Shung whispered. You never were. His own twisted reflection screamed as it fell into the abyss, all the lies Shung had believed about himself disappearing with it. The darkness shattered. Shung's eyes opened. The hospital room came into focus slowly. Sterile white ceiling, beeping monitors, antiseptic smell. And on either side of his bed, two faces he'd been fighting to get back to. Jamin's head was resting on the edge of the mattress, his hand wrapped around Shung's. Junho sat in a chair pulled close, his fingers tangled with Shung's other hand. Both of them were crying silently, their faces exhausted and grief-stricken. In the corner, Yuan slept curled up in a chair that was too big for him, his face still showing the tracks of dried tears. Shung tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. He managed a small sound, barely more than a breath. Both twins' heads snapped up. For a moment, they just stared at him, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Then Jamin made a choked sound and pressed his forehead against Shung's hand, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Junho leaned over and kissed Shung's forehead over and over, tears streaming down his face. You're awake. You're awake. We thought we lost you. I'm sorry, Shung managed to rasp out. Then stronger. I'm free. The twins didn't understand, but they didn't need to. Shung was alive, and that was all that mattered. Yuan stirred in his chair, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw Shung awake, he scrambled off the chair and carefully climbed onto the bed, mindful of all the injuries. He curled against Shung's side and signed with trembling hands. You came back. Shung's eyes filled with tears. He looked at all three of them, his family, and felt the weight he'd been carrying for years finally lift. I saw the truth, he whispered. He was never real. It was always me punishing myself. The twins exchanged glances, beginning to understand the depth of what had just happened. Shung reached for both their hands, his voice cracking with emotion. I'm ready now. I'm ready to live. I'm ready to love you. Three hands clasped together. Yuan nestled against Shung's broken body. The twins cried with relief and overwhelming love. And for the first time since his brother died, Shung was truly free. Shung took his first steps without crutches on a Tuesday morning, and the twins looked at him like he'd just won a war. 3 weeks had passed since the fall, 3 weeks of hospital beds and physical therapy and slow, painful healing. But Shung was alive, and more than that, he was free. No more hallucinations. No more ghost wearing his brother's face. Just the ache of grief that felt normal now, manageable, like something he could carry without being crushed by it. Jamin stood at one end of the physical therapy room, his arms crossed but his eyes soft with pride. Junho waited at the other end, hands ready to catch Shung if he stumbled. You've got this, Junho said quietly. Shung took a breath and walked. Each step sent pain shooting through his still healing leg, but he didn't stop. He made it all the way across the room and into Junho's waiting arms. I knew you could do it, Junho whispered against his hair. Behind them, Jamin smiled in that rare, unguarded way that made Shung's heart stutter. The day Sung was discharged, Yuan was waiting at the estate entrance with a banner he'd made himself. Messy letters spelled out, "Welcome home," in crayon, surrounded by drawings of stick figures holding hands. Sung's throat tightened as he climbed out of the car, still moving carefully, but moving on his own. Yuan ran to him and wrapped his arms around Sung's waist, burying his face against his stomach. "I missed you," Yuan signed when he finally pulled back. "I missed you too," Sung signed back. That evening, after Yuan had been tucked into bed, the twins came to Sung's room, and they stood in the doorway, looking uncertain in a way Sung had never seen from them before. "Can we come in?" Jamin asked. Sung nodded, his heart already racing. They sat on either side of him on the bed, close but not touching, like they were afraid he might break. "We need to say something," Junho started, his voice quiet. "And we need you to really hear us this time." Sung swallowed hard. "Okay." Jamin took Sung's hand carefully, his thumb brushing over the fading bruises on Sung's knuckles. "We love you. We've been in love with you for weeks now, and we want to build a life with you, a real one. With all three of us," Junho added, "if that's what you want." Sung looked between them, these two incredible men who'd saved him in every way a person could be saved. His eyes burned with tears he didn't try to hide. "I love you too," he whispered. "Both of you. I want this. I want all of it." Jamin's breath came out in a rush, like he'd been holding it for weeks. Junho's hand found Sung's other hand, and for a moment they just sat there, connected, breathing together. Then Jamin leaned in slowly, giving Sung every chance to pull away. When Sung didn't, Jamin kissed him with a gentleness that made Sung's entire body ache with longing. When they pulled apart, Junho was there, his kiss different but equally devastating in its tenderness. Their scents wrapped around Sung like a blanket, warm and safe, and right in a way that made him certain he'd finally found where he belonged. 2 days later, Jamin announced they were hosting a neighborhood meeting at the estate. "It's time to end this," he said, his expression hard. "The rumors, the lies, all of it." Sung insisted on being there, even though his legs still ached and standing for long periods exhausted him. "I want to support you," he said firmly. The twins didn't argue. The neighbors gathered in the estate's main hall, their faces ranging from curious to suspicious to openly hostile. Jamin and Yunho stood at the front of the room, commanding attention without saying a word. Sung stood slightly behind them, close enough to offer silent support. "We called you here to address the rumors that have been circulating about our family for years," Yemen began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Specifically, the claims that we performed some kind of ritual that caused our son's deafness." The room went silent. Junho stepped forward holding a folder. "Yuan's deafness is genetic. Honey, he was diagnosed at 3 years old with a hereditary condition that's well documented in medical literature." He opened the folder and pulled out papers. "We have genetic testing results, doctor's statements, and medical records going back years. All of it proves that his condition is natural and has nothing to do with anything supernatural." He passed the documents to the front row, letting them circulate through the crowd. "The rumors were started by a business competitor years ago," Jamin continued, his tone ice cold. "Someone who wanted to damage our reputation and used our son to do it. And you all believed it. You repeated it. You used it as an excuse to ostracize a 6-year-old child. Several people had the decency to look ashamed. Some of you warned our Shung that he might be our next sacrifice," Junho said, in his gaze finding the woman who'd confronted Shung on the street. "You spread fear and hatred about an innocent child because it was easier than questioning whether the gossip was true." The woman's face flushed red, but she didn't look away. "We're not asking for your friendship," Jimin said. "We're demanding accountability. You owe our son an apology. You owe us the truth, and you owe it to yourselves to be better than this." Silence stretched uncomfortably. Then slowly an older man in the back stood up. "You're right. I'm sorry. I repeated things I had no business repeating, and I'm ashamed of how I acted." A few others followed, standing and offering awkward apologies that sounded genuine enough. But many remained seated, their faces closed off, still clinging to their suspicions. Jamin's expression hardened. "For those of you who can't find it in yourselves to admit you were wrong, you're no longer welcome in our lives. Stay away from our family." He turned and walked out, Junho at his side. Sheng followed them, his heart swelling with pride. Later that evening, something small but miraculous happened. A child from down the street knocked on the door and asked, through his nervous mother, if Yuan wanted to play. Yuan's face lit up like the sun. Sheng watched from the window as Yuan and the other child ran around the garden, signing and laughing and just being kids. That night, the twins asked Sheng to be their official partner. Not just someone living in their home, but family. We want to do this right, Yemen said. A bonding ceremony, making it official. If you'll have us, Junho added. He didn't even have to think about it. Why, yes. Later, Sheng found himself standing at the window where he'd almost died. But this time, he wasn't alone. Jamin's arms wrapped around him from behind, solid and warm. Junho stood beside them, his hand resting gently on Sheng's shoulder. Yuan appeared and took Sheng's hand, holding it tight. Together, they watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Sheng thought about his brother, the real one, not the ghost his guilt had created. He thought about what his brother would have wanted for him, a family, love, healing, a future worth living for. He finally had all of it. Thank you, Sheng whispered, not sure if he was talking to the twins, to Yuan, or to his brother's memory. Maybe it didn't matter. Jamin pressed a kiss to the top of Seong's head. Junho squeezed his shoulder gently. Mrik Yuan leaned against his side, and Sheng realized that this was what home felt like. Not a place, but the people who chose to love you even when you were broken. The people who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. The people who saw you at your worst and decided you were worth fighting for anyway. He'd lost so much. His brother, his career, years of his life to grief and guilt. But he'd found something too. A family who loved him, a child who needed him, two alphas who'd waited for him to be ready. And finally, after so long, he'd found himself again. The sun rose higher, spilling light across the estate, and Sheng, for the first time in years, felt nothing but hope. The end. If Sung's journey from broken to whole touched your heart, drop a like to let me know you're here. Can you comment below which moment hit you the hardest? Was it Yuan's first sign, the fall, or the sunrise at the end? And if you want more stories about love that heals, families that choose each other, and second chances that change everything, hit subscribe. Because everyone deserves a story where broken pieces become something beautiful. You're not alone. And neither is Sejong anymore.